Next from Springfield, we talk one-on-one with State Senator Jim Oberweis, Republican candidate for U.S. Senate. State Senator Oberweis talks to us about why he chose to run for the U.S. Senate, why he thinks his Democratic opponent Dick Durbin's policies are bad for Illinois and the country, and what he would do to help get the nation's economy back on track, as well as reducing the national debt. This runs about 45 minutes.
Senator Jim Oberweis, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
My pleasure.
Anyone who pays attention to politics knows that you are now the Republican nominee for the U.S. Senate. They probably, though, I think a lot of people still don't know a lot about you, although you've been a state senator for a couple of years now.
Right.
One of the things that always strikes me is when you have an individual such as yourself, you've been very successful in your private life. I think you're, what, about 67 years old now?
Correct.
You're worth millions of dollars. You've been very successful both as starting an investment house that I understand you have in the neighborhood of around $1 billion under management. You also run, people may be more familiar with your name from Oberweis Dairy. I had a friend from St. Louis mention to me when I said we were going to talk that she loves your chocolate milk.
A lot of people do, fortunately.
She goes, it's a little fattening, but I love it. But, you know, at an age when you could be doing whatever it is you want to do, playing with the grandkids, you've already accomplished more from a financial standpoint and probably, you know, in business than most people will ever know. Why put yourself out there to run for the U.S. Senate?
Well, let me just tell you, I've had some successes and I've had some failures in business. 25 years ago, my net worth was zero. But obviously business has been very good. I grew up in the dairy business, the milk and ice cream business, but had an older brother, John, who went into that business. So I decided I better do something else. I don't want to be little brother Jim. And that's why I ended up as first a stockbroker and then later on starting my own stock brokerage firm and money management company. And actually a family of mutual funds. Today we have 6 funds, 3 U.S. funds and 3 international funds, which by the way had an average increase, an average return to investors last year of 50%, which was pretty phenomenal. That doesn't happen very often. But about 25 years ago, my brother John had a stroke and was unable to continue in the family milk and ice cream business. The family was talking about liquidating it. Having grown up in that, in a business started by my grandfather, I didn't want to see that happen, so I bought that business at that time, and we've grown it from about 50 employees then to about 1,200 employees today. I'm fortunate because I have one son, Joe, who's running the dairy business today, my other son, Jim, running the investment business today, so that I'm free to do some other things. And the plan, quite frankly, was to spend more of the winters in Florida with my wife, playing golf, tennis, or whatever we might choose to do. But a funny thing happened on the way to Florida. When some friends convinced me to run for the state senate, believing that my background in investments could help solve our pension problem. What I found out, of course, after getting to Springfield is it's much more difficult to solve those pension problems. It doesn't just take knowledge, it also takes voting power, and when we're in the super minority in the state senate, it's very difficult to accomplish things. So.
But on the other hand, if I might, I mean, you also ran for office a couple of times. You ran for governor,
Sure.
You ran for Congress.
Right.
Why would you do that? I mean, I'm not saying that's wrong, but I mean, again, a lot of people would have just probably indulged themselves by spending time with their family or something.
Look, my youngest daughter just had twins a couple of months ago, so I now have 19 grandchildren.
Wow.
And to be honest with you, I'm doing this because I'm concerned about the direction of our country. I'm concerned about whether my grandchildren and your grandchildren and all of our viewers' grandchildren will have the same types of economic opportunities that we had growing up. I want to do everything I can to provide that opportunity for future generations. While millionaire career politician Dick Durbin has been in Washington, D.C., which is for 32 years, our national debt has gone from $1 trillion to $17 trillion. That's a huge burden that we're putting on future generations. We need more people to stand up and say, stop, that's enough. We need to have a balanced budget. We need to run this government more effectively, more efficiently, root out the waste, fraud, and abuse, get spending under control, create a more simplified tax structure so that entrepreneurs and business people are willing to risk their time, their energy, and their capital to create businesses here in the U.S. which will provide more jobs for all of our citizens. And at the same time, by the way, we need to have an educational system that will provide the right tools so that people are capable of fulfilling those jobs.
I was going to say a lot of people, a lot of Republicans will say waste, fraud, and abuse. The thing is they don't have your background. You've run businesses, and through your investment, I just know, a lot of people you and I know are not financially literate. They don't see how what government does impacts the ability to create jobs. So let's spell that out. I don't want to just throw that bumper sticker line out there. Why, when government increases regulations, the president the other day announced to his administration that they want to increase the regulations on methane gas that comes out of landfills, coal, and other places. Now, some people are going to say, well, that's good because it's a so-called greenhouse gas. But whether it's a regulation on that, whether it's raising the minimum wage, whether it is some other environmental regulation, whatever, spell that out. Why does that matter to a businessman?
Well, I think we all agree there have to be reasonable regulations in place to assure safety of people, to assure safety of our environment. However, that has to be balanced by the cost of those regulations. And when you're an entrepreneur and you're thinking about starting a business, you're going to weigh all the pluses and all the minuses. In Illinois, for example, we have terrible workman's comp laws, where workman's comp costs are more than double what they are in neighboring Indiana. They're much higher than virtually all of our surrounding states. In fact, they're considered one of the 3 worst in the entire country. That's one of the costs that people look at. We don't just look at what is the cost of labor, what is the productivity of labor. We certainly look at those, but we also look at the cost of regulations, the cost of insurance, of workman's comp, of all those different types of things, and then make a decision. Are we willing to invest at all? And if so, where do we want to invest? How do we want to invest? In what do we want to invest? And I just want to go back to your point. I will tell you that my impressions coming to Springfield a year and a half ago, I was very pleasantly surprised with the friendliness, congeniality of my colleagues in the Senate. I've actually got more Democrat friends than I've ever had in my life. But at the same time, I was shocked at how little some of my Democrat colleagues understand about economics, particularly a group from Chicago, some of those that have never really had much experience in the private sector, some of those who have been provided with their campaign apparatus by Senator Cullerton or by Speaker Madigan, owe their allegiances to him, and they just kind of trust in those people for all their economic decisions, and that's very bad. Somehow, in fact, I believe one of my colleagues has just proposed a bill that would require those who do not have any economic background to have a refresher course in economics to serve in the Illinois legislature. Now, I doubt that that bill is going to pass. I believe it was Dave Severson who proposed it, but it would be very interesting if it did pass.
Let's look at some of the economic aspects to make maybe some transition. When you look at, for those who don't know and haven't looked at the federal budget for recently, you know, we sometimes, I think, in the media mislead people because we'll have an example of something that, well, can you believe they're spending $100,000 on a rainforest museum in Iowa or something like that?
Right.
And I think people get the wrong idea that we can balance the budget by cutting out just these little spending things and that kind of waste. In fact, right now, about 60%, the vast majority of the budget is entitlement spending. It's Medicare, Medicaid, food stamps, and those grow on automatic pilot.
Right.
So you really can't balance the budget, even if you wiped out all of the spending of transportation, education, veterans affairs, you're not going to have a balanced budget.
That's true.
How do we get a handle, knowing what you know? You're obviously financially literate, and you've, I presume, thought about this. What would you like to see? What kind of policies would you support, if not introduce?
Well, first of all, let me say, just from a psychological standpoint, I think it's important that we address some of those smaller $100,000 or $1 million wasted efforts, because it sends a signal that we are concerned. And too many of these programs appeal to special interests, where you get a few people who are going to profit by this or have their own special project taken care of, and they are able to direct legislation to make that happen. But it doesn't benefit the most of the people who are paying for it as taxpayers. So I think those are important from a psychological standpoint. But you're absolutely
But
right.
not financially.
That's correct. When, or just this much financially.
Right.
Yes, the big
It's a
programs
grain of
are.
sand on a beach, isn't it?
Yeah, maybe a little more than that, but your principle is correct.
Yeah.
Actually, Social Security used to be the biggest unfunded liability. Today, it is Medicare by a large amount. Medicare problem is significantly greater than Social Security. And I don't know that there's an easy fix, but we have to look at these programs. We have to understand, here's our revenue. That's all we can spend, and we've got to do whatever it takes to balance that. And you know, my experience in the private sector is, you know, dairy business, people have lots of good ideas. They'd like to do this, they'd like to do that. And my answer always is, that's great, we'd like to do that too, but we have to live within our financial means. We can only spend hopefully a little less than what our revenue is, so that we have a little profit left at the end of the year. In government, if you just spend exactly 100% of your revenue, things would be much better than they are today. So how do you deal with the Medicare? There's not an easy answer. One of the and I'm willing to go to Washington and listen to all kinds of different ideas and try to help support the ones that make the most sense. One of the ideas that I have thought about, at least, is to align Medicare age with our Social Security age. Social Security age, as I'm sure you're aware, has recently over the last 8 or 10 years, whatever it is, gone from 65 to 67 for normal retirement age, phased in over a period of years. If we did the same thing with Medicare, phase it in over a period of years, perhaps everybody who's 55 or older now wouldn't be affected at all. Perhaps for every year less than 55 you are, your Medicare age would increase by 1 month. So if you were 45, it would increase by 10 months or something, eventually bringing it up to 67 to be aligned with Social Security. That could produce significant savings over a period of time. A lot of these programs have to be measured, weighed to figure out exactly what kind of revenue that would save and how do we balance it. And I'm not saying that suggestion is the only one. That's just one of many things that are out there. But we need to take that action. We need to do some difficult things. And unfortunately, it's hard to do that because people don't realize that they believe the government can just keep on spending and keep on going with these programs. And if you have a program that pays out $2 for every $1 it takes in, on balance, people are going to like it because they're going to benefit on balance. So that's the problem, and it's hard to control that. You mentioned food stamps, now called SNAP, more properly, I believe. I forget the exact number, but I think something like 1 in 6 people in this country are now receiving food stamps or benefits from the SNAP program. That needs to be separated out of our agricultural bill. It's now 80%.
Actually, I thought it was.
No.
Didn't they pass the Farm Bill without food stamps in it?
The House did, but the Senate didn't, and it went back into one bill. It would make sense to separate it out. I agree with the House on that measure because it lets us look at that logically, that program, and let's look at the other agricultural bill and what makes sense for agriculture. Instead of combining them, they combine them for political purposes to get support from the agricultural people for the SNAP program and the SNAP people for the agricultural program.
I'm reminded, in pulling myself back, when you're a policy wonk like I am, you follow the details on things, but the average voter isn't. They're probably going to look at this at a headline level. So let's take it from a headline level. On economic issues, you're a fiscal conservative, and basically you would say, let's live within our means.
Exactly.
A lot of people, I think, would agree with that. I think people generally...
Until it comes to my program.
Well, a lot of people, I think, understand you got to make government work. Everyone has to live within some kind of a budget. You can live for a while on borrowed money, but eventually you got to pay that back.
That's the problem. Correct.
And by the way, when we talk about $17 trillion, which people can't even imagine that amount of money,
Right.
that's really not even the totality of what we owe. That's just the official debt.
Right.
That's not counting the unfunded mandates. In other
Right.
words, the debt that we've built up into these
Medicare,
programs
Social
like
Security,
Medicare,
yep.
Social Security,
Yep.
that is going to come
That's right.
onto the books in short order as the baby boomers retire. So really, we're looking at somewhere along the lines of, it's anyone's guess, but closer probably to 80 to 100 trillion dollars.
And Illinois is a great crucible example of what happens when you let these things go too far. In Illinois, we're facing huge problems because of our unfunded pension liability, and it is squeezing out very important services.
Spending on other programs.
Exactly, social services, public safety, and so on. We're going to have the same thing at the federal government level.
And just on that point, I think around 2002, my numbers will be approximately correct. I think the state, 2004 rather, I think the state was spending somewhere only about $2 billion. That sounds like a lot, it is. But something like $2 billion on the state pension, whereas today it's $6 billion.
Correct.
So you can see that in less than 10 years, it's gone up threefold.
Right.
And it's going to continue to increase. So that is exactly the same thing on these entitlement programs. But let's also, a lot of times people say, you know, I could vote for the Republicans on economic issues, but I can't swallow their social approach. They think that Republicans who want hands-off on economic issues want hands-on on social issues, want to tell us how to live, and you're against any number of things that they would be for. Philosophically, where are you on the social issue, and what should be the role of government vis-a-vis controlling people's social lives?
Look, I believe in the sanctity of life, but that's not what this election is about. This election is about who understands the economy, who can help get our economy growing at a faster rate. If you think of it, you know, in the old example of like a pie, one way to look at it is the Democrats say, okay, here's our pie. We as government want to take a bigger piece of the pie every year so that we have more control and more to spend. I believe on the Republican side, we look at it a little differently. We say, okay, here's the pie. How can we grow that pie and make that pie bigger so that if government continues to take the same percentage, government ends up with more revenue because they're getting the same percentage of a larger pie.
Or even if they take a smaller percentage.
Well, that would be even better, but that's too much to hope for. We'd be delighted to let them keep the same percentage and grow that pie. And I think that's really the difference between the Republican Party and the Democrat Party at this point, and that's what this election is about. Mr. Durbin has spent his entire life in the public sector. He's lived off government checks, and he's become a millionaire while doing it. As I said, 25 years ago, I had a net worth of $0, but I've been successful enough in the private sector to have obtained a reasonable living and reasonable assets, and I'm willing to give back whatever I can with the remainder of my life to try to help change the direction of this country. And I truly believe that if I win this election in November, it will be part of a Republican wave across this country that will allow Republicans to take control of the United States Senate, and that will change truly the direction of this country.
If you're a Democratic voter, and of course then the question is, are you a Harry Truman Democratic voter, or are you someone that's further to the left?
How about a Ronald Reagan Democrat? Those are the kind I like a lot.
If you're a Democratic voter, should they fear Senator Jim Oberweis in the U.S. Senate? Should they fear the Republican takeover of the Senate?
I certainly don't think so. Obviously,
you know, people are going to say, look, we just went through the gay marriage here, right? And that's one of the social issues.
Sure.
So let's run, I mean, any number of these issues are so complex, we could obviously spend the entire interview on them, but so let's just so we can kind of check off some of the issues where you are. Where are you on the issue of like gay marriage?
Look, I believe in traditional marriage, but the law is passed, and I also believe in enforcing the law, so it's time to move on at this point. Again, focus on the economy. You know, do we worry about these things if we don't have a job? No. We worry about how do we get a good job. The key to that, I think, is education. There are some very interesting things happening in that area. School choice is something that I've been very strongly a proponent of for many, many years. Generally speaking, parents have a better idea than government does about what is good for their child. To the degree that we can give them more choices about how to educate their kids, I think that's terrific. And there's a very interesting, I guess I'd call it experiment going on in Chicago today. And I have not visited. I've just read about it. I think it was in Time magazine, a school called, I think it's Sarah E. Good or Goody School. Basically, it's a high school that they've extended to 6 years from 4 years. It's being financed significantly by IBM, and the program has significant influence from IBM. But at the end of the 6 years, each graduate is offered an immediate job with IBM at a starting salary of $40,000. And this is on the southwest side of Chicago, where kids frequently don't have access to good jobs. So, you know, we're saying these kids, particularly minority kids, don't have the same opportunities. They don't have access to a good job. Here's a situation that says, okay, spend 2 years beyond high school, beyond normal high school, in the school. You will be guaranteed that you have the skills. You'll be guaranteed that you have a job with IBM, not a bad company to work for, and a starting salary of $40,000. That may not be your ultimate goal, but $40,000 to start with is not bad.
It's a good incentive, obviously.
Correct.
And just, again, people, some of the things that have shocked me over the years of covering various issues, 40,000 kids in Illinois drop out of high school every year. Yeah. I found that a shocking number. Someone from the Clinton administration once said, we know how to cure poverty. If you are not an unwed mother,
that's right.
If you don't abuse drugs and alcohol, and if you finish high school, you may not be wealthy, but you'll have a job and a roof over your head.
And interestingly, some of the studies that I've seen looked at that just a little bit farther, and basically have said, if you're married, you hold your job, and you've graduated from high school, those three things actually lead you to a middle class over a period of time.
Let's talk about some of the other issues on international affairs. Obviously, that's something that you don't vote on in the Illinois Senate, but you would in the U.S. Senate. Right. Let's start off on a general idea. What do you think about international affairs? We're in a global economy now. Some people want to put up tariffs and protect American jobs. Other people say free trade. I know part of the funds that Oberweis Investments has are the China funds and others. So you've obviously thought about these issues very much. Give us your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I am absolutely a believer in free trade. Free trade may inconvenience certain people who have vested interests and who are protected by certain governmental regulations, but removing those barriers and allowing free trade tends to benefit both countries in total over a period of time. The more that we can do to allow countries to take advantage of their natural advantages, whatever those are, for example, in the Midwest, agriculture may be our big advantage. We probably can produce corn and soybeans and other things more efficiently than almost any other country or any other state in the entire world. Let us do that. Let us sell those goods where they need those goods without barriers. Perhaps some other countries have some other natural advantages. It used to be a low wage in China, but interestingly, that is changing very significantly. Wages have been rising rapidly in China, and manufacturing jobs are now moving out of China to lower cost countries like Vietnam and Mexico. And some of those manufacturing jobs are even coming back to the United States because we have an advantage on energy costs. So,
well, and the transportation costs. You obviously have to move the stuff across the Pacific, and that adds cost.
Yes, yes. I believe I just saw a story that BMW is now producing cars in the United States, I think it was South Carolina, for export to Europe.
That's right.
That's correct. Pretty amazing. So to the degree that we can allow free trade among countries, it will, in the long run, benefit in total those countries. There will be specific individuals or specific businesses that are inconvenienced by that, that have been taking advantage of protectionist laws, but in the long run, it really helps everybody.
To that end, I would think you weren't a huge supporter of Bill Clinton, but did he do right on passing the NAFTA?
You know, I could not believe when Bill Clinton was reelected because of all of the public indiscretions.
That was before we knew of Monica Lewinsky.
The reelection, I believe, occurred after that.
In '96, and Lewinsky was '98, I think.
Okay, well, perhaps I'm wrong then. But I will tell you that I did, as a part of a group called Young Presidents Organization meet Bill Clinton in Washington. The guy was absolutely just a terrific, I don't know, communicator, individual, whatever. Built a great rapport. Understand this is a group of primarily Republicans meeting with Bill Clinton. When I left, I certainly didn't say, gee, he's my guy, but I said, well, now I do understand how he was reelected. He was very good at making people feel comfortable, making people feel like he was telling the truth, which obviously he wasn't at all times. But on balance, as I look back on it, there have been a lot worse presidents than Bill Clinton. He did some reasonably good things, particularly in the free trade area. I think that made a lot of sense. So when I look back on it, I think the morality displayed in public office by Bill Clinton was terrible, but the job he did as president wasn't the worst.
I want to, before we leave here, on foreign affairs, let's talk about military power. We look at what happens right now with Russia threatening Ukraine. We had thought the Cold War was over. Vladimir Putin seems determined to bring it back.
At least a chilly war.
Aside from trade, on foreign relations, what are your thoughts on issues of national security?
Look, I think it's absolutely critical that we maintain the best equipped, the best trained, the most effective fighting force in the entire world. Having said that, however, I don't believe that we can afford to be the policeman of the entire world. When you look at what happened in Syria, for example, we were very close to getting involved in a hot war thanks to our current president, Mr. Obama, saying he was drawing a red line and don't step over that line, and sure enough, Syria stepped over the line. Interestingly, it was kind of Vladimir Putin who helped pull him back and saved him from a potentially very embarrassing situation. Syria is a great example where, from what I read and from what I seem to be the case, you got essentially two not very good groups fighting each other. For us to try to take sides in that, I think is a mistake, and I don't think we can afford to do it. Certainly many individuals have said that military power is certainly something that we must maintain. It's certainly a concern for the future, but economic power, economic concerns are of equal importance. One of the risks that we may have in the future may be the amount of debt that we have. We may be facing cyber warfare. We may be facing financial warfare.
And we are facing cyber warfare.
That's right, and those things may become equally important with military strength.
Can we lose, knowing your economic background, can we lose our ability as a nation to impose our will on foreign affairs if we become so massively in debt that our debt is held by foreign nations?
Well, we may in fact lose that ability if that happens going forward. We need to be very careful that we can maintain our financial leadership in the world. We need to be careful that we maintain our military superiority. But I don't believe that we should be trying to intrude in all areas of the world. Ukraine, for instance, to me, I'm very upset with Mr. Putin with what he's doing there. But I don't believe that we should be talking about or thinking about sending American military forces into that region. That is arguably a European matter. The European leadership, European countries should be addressing that to the degree that they can. Now, you know, some so-called financial challenges to Russia that we can put in place, perhaps that's worth doing along with our European friends. But I'm not sure how much effect those sanctions will really have, and to a degree, it's almost making Mr. Putin more popular among Russian people.
So would you be opposed to the sanctions if you were?
No. I think what we're doing is reasonable at this point, but probably not very effective. I tell you what I do think would be important, and we've talked about this. We need to complete and build the pipeline to get natural gas from Canada and from North Dakota and South Dakota.
I wanted to bring that up. I appreciate it. So let's talk about energy independence. Let's jump in there. And again, economic issue, but I also want to, this covers two aspects, and it's almost like a seesaw, seems like. I don't know if it needs to be a seesaw. Maybe that's something you should address. But On one hand, we have the economic interests. On the other hand, we often have environmental interests. Now, some would say on the environmentalist side that the two are opposed. Keystone is an example. It's been held up now for years. We're trying to bring down oil from Alberta, Canada. Again, for our viewers' sake, viewers may be interested to know that Illinois' #1 trading partner is Alberta, Canada. And that
I didn't even know that.
Illinois does more trade with Alberta, Canada than with any state in the nation.
Interesting.
Because we're one of the largest refining states.
Oh, sure.
We're the 4th largest refining states, and so we already have oil coming into Illinois to be refined.
Right.
We have Enbridge is one of the pipelines right up by Pontiac. So the Keystone would come into Illinois and bring more oil to be refined. So it would directly impact the Illinois economy. Well, let's talk about environmental concerns.
Regardless of how it affects the Illinois economy, it's the right thing to do for our country. And I truly hope that when voters elect me, they will elect me on the basis that I will vote in ways that I believe will be the best things for our country. The same way that I've told people in our Senate District 25, if you elect me, my first goal is going to be to do the right things for our state and for our country, not to try to get more pork for my district. And that's the kind of voting record I believe I've established. And in Washington, I would try to do the same thing. We have to have our country first, and then our state second, and then individual areas. But we've got to do the right things for our country.
So obviously you're for the Keystone Pipeline.
Absolutely.
What about fracking? We passed a fracking bill in Illinois, and
I was one of the sponsors. I believe it's the right thing to do to provide energy independence for us. It will help us to balance our budget. I believe we should free our companies to be allowed to sell natural gas or LNG or whatever they can sell to other countries. The world market for energy is indeed a world market. It's not a localized commodity market. And again, there's another example we were talking about earlier in protectionism. If we open up those markets, it may be that we become sellers of natural gas to parts of Europe, and we might end up buying some other petroleum products or other products from some other countries that can, Mexico, for instance, might be able to ship it to us more cheaply, or Canada shipping it to us cheaply, and at the same time we're able to export some of our extra natural gas, benefiting all countries involved.
what about issues like global warming? Now that people call it global change or climate change. But some years ago during the Clinton administration, there was the Kyoto Protocol, so-called because it was put together in Kyoto, Japan. But it would have limited greenhouse gases, would have been applied certainly to the United States. In general, when we have these federal and international agreements, what would your approach be on those sort of issues?
Let me say, I consider myself to be an expert on the economy. I understand economics. I understand financial matters very well. I have to say, I'm still gathering information on some of these environmental issues. It is important that we do the right thing for future generations to protect our environment. I just need to be 100% convinced that the actions that we're taking will make a difference for the environment and will do so at a reasonable cost.
If there was an agreement like Kyoto that applied to the United States but did not apply to India or China, would you support it?
Well, it depends. If India and China are 90% of the problem and this agreement is going to solve 10% of the problem, it isn't very effective. And I don't know what those numbers are. I'm just throwing numbers out there.
Right.
It would be important to try to get support of India and China and other countries on whatever agreement that we choose to adopt.
Sometimes when you get into these conversations about issues, and you've probably run into this, people will take someone's statements to an extreme, as if you're saying there shouldn't be any regulation. The businesses you're in, you can't sell food products is through his Oberweis Dairy without being regulated. You can't sell your mutual funds without facing regulations.
I was just going to say, I've served in two industries, the financial services industry and the food industry, which have to be two of the most regulated industries in the world.
So you're familiar with regulations?
Absolutely.
As a philosophical matter.
And supportive generally of regulations, particularly in food. We want to make sure we have a very safe food supply.
Well, and that's what I was going to say. In your estimation, what is the proper role of government?
Well, I think it's right there. protecting people within reasonable restraints and reasonable costs. And I think we've done a pretty good job in the food industry of providing safety for people. Not a perfect job. There always are slip-ups, but in general, I think we've done a good job. I think we should continue to do so, and certainly regulation makes sense in that area. Now, how far do you go? You know, we now require labeling on package for calories, for fat content, for various other things, which I support. I think that's great. As a consumer, I like to see that information. There are some regulations that could require the so-called country of origin labeling that could be very, very complex and complicated and could be very expensive. So-called GMO labeling. I am very supportive of allowing a company to list in large letters on its packaging that this product is GMO free, if in fact it is, and they can establish that it is.
And we should say that means genetically modified.
Yes, right. And if, I mean, the argument, there has been a push for a requirement to label all food products as GMO free or containing generally modified organisms. I'm reluctant, concerned about going that far because of enormous costs. Their argument is, well, people are willing to pay for that information. And my answer is, if people are willing to pay for that information, companies will provide that information. So if they have a GMO-free product that they would like to market and can establish it's GMO-free, they can do that and charge a little bit higher price because people will be willing to pay for that, if in fact people are willing to pay for that. That's how the market works. The market makes that determination and lets us as consumers make that determination. I strongly support that. We faced that problem with Oberweis Dairy about 20 years ago when Monsanto began selling bovine growth hormone to encourage, force, whatever you want to call it, cows to produce more milk. We took a position that our customers were not in favor of that, and we were going to pay our farmers a higher price, a premium, to produce milk that was free from animals that have been treated with bovine growth hormone. And we literally had to fight the FDA for about 15 years about being able to state on our products that our milk is from cows that are not treated with bovine growth hormones. Their argument was, well, there is no scientific evidence that there is a difference between milk that comes from cows that are treated with hormones and cows that aren't. And if we were allowed to put that on our package or on our label, it would imply that there is a difference. So that was an argument we had over and over, and legislation across different states.
I suppose the argument, though, is even if there isn't
we finally won.
Well, even if there isn't a difference, if your customers
want to know
perceive it to be a difference.
Exactly. And that's what I'm saying with GMO labeling. Let companies put that on their labeling if their customers are interested in that and willing to pay for it.
You know, one thing that I was surprised just in looking a little bit at your background, that one time you were a teacher.
I started after graduating from the University of Illinois teaching math and science in Aurora.
Was that at a public school?
It was. Waldo Junior High, which was kind of a challenged school in the area at that time. But it was a good experience for me, but it really was not what I wanted to do for a long-term career.
All life experiences we carry with us. How, if in any way, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but to the extent that you ever deal with educational issues, does that have the fact that you were in the classroom impact your insights? Sure
it does. It helps you to understand what teachers go through, and I think gave me a little insight into who's a good teacher, who's not a good teacher, how do you determine that. And it also, you know, at that time, teachers started at a pretty low base salary and then had guaranteed step-up raises each year. And it made me a firm believer in merit pay for teachers. There is absolutely no evidence that a teacher who's been teaching for 30 years is better than a teacher who's been teaching for 5 years. Now, there is evidence that a teacher who's been teaching for 5 years may be a better teacher than a teacher who's been teaching for 1 year. But you kind of reach a peak somewhere in the 5 to 10 years where skills are at the highest level. And after 25 or 30 or 35 years, for some teachers, they get tired and they just keep on going to get that pension. we ought to allow principals to run their schools, to pay their best teachers higher rates, to keep those best teachers in the schools, and to be able to reduce compensation to teachers that they deem as not doing a best job, and to be able to fire teachers that they believe are not doing a good job. Then those principals should be held to the same kind of standards by their own school board, and the school boards by the voters. That's the way the system should work. It's not the way the system does work.
What you're running obviously against Senator Dick Durbin, and as you well know, many people think that you don't have much of a chance for election. But we touched a little bit about this, about why you're running, but what is it? What are your impressions of Dick Durbin? Obviously, you feel that you would be able to do a better job. What is it that he's doing, or issues that he's supporting, or his approach to the job that you take issue with?
He's been a great politician. He's been a very poor legislator. He has become kind of the mouthpiece of the far extreme left-wing liberal group. He's a guy who has attempted to use the IRS to intimidate his political opponents. Not only Republicans, but Democrats as well feel that's entirely wrong. Millionaire career politician Dick Durbin has also been one of the leading proponents of Obamacare. The way that was passed, with not a single Republican vote and no working together to get to the best solution, I think was the beginning of the problem. The idea that government knows best, that government can tell us what we can buy in the insurance area, is fundamentally flawed. I believe that has to be repealed and replaced with something that is better and fairer for all citizens. And the fact that millionaire Dick Durbin has been in Washington now for 32 years, at a time when we're going to have on our ballot in November a constitutional amendment to limit state legislators to 8 years in office, certainly is a quandary for the editorial boards of the newspapers who generally support term limits. How can they then turn around and support a guy who's been in Washington for 32 years, lost his roots in Illinois, who's saying, give me 6 more years?
Speaking of term limits, what are your thoughts on term limits?
I think it is incredibly important that we pass that here in Illinois.
Is 8 years enough?
I think it is. I believe that citizen legislators will tend to vote in ways that they believe is good for the state, good for their country, whereas career politicians tend to vote in ways that they think is good for re-election. It's important that we have people voting on what is good for the country.
And as we near the end of this, let me just let you have the last word and talk to the voters about why should they support Jim Oberweis and make you the next U.S. Senator.
Look, I believe that balance is important. We have not had balance in Springfield. We haven't had balance in Washington. I believe that I've learned to work with Democrats here in Springfield. I believe that I can work with Democrats in Washington to work together to avoid these last-minute showdowns that we've had in Washington. My goal, my guide would be Ronald Reagan and Tip O'Neill, 2 guys who had pretty different opinions on economic issues, and yet they were able to work together to solve problems. I showed last year, in my first year, that I was able to work with Democrats to get a bill passed in Illinois to increase our speed limit on interstates to 70 from 65, a bill that had been defeated 4 times in a row. Not only did we get it passed, we got it passed in the Senate 44-6. We got it passed in the House 85-30, overwhelming majorities. And I did it by showing logical arguments of why it makes sense, sitting down and explaining with everybody who would listen why it made sense, working together, not trying to take credit for this being a Republican bill, but rather a bipartisan bill that was good for the state of Illinois. Similarly, I'll work to try to pass good legislation in terms of what is good for the United States of America, not what's good for Republicans or Democrats, and I will work to try to make sure that legislation has a chance to be voted on. One of the things I will strongly oppose is this idea that the majority party should never allow something to go to a vote unless you have a majority of the majority, so that when they bring it to vote, you know that they already have the support of the majority party. I believe good legislation ideas may come from Democrats, may come from Republicans, and the best probably comes from some combination or compromise between both.
All right, Senator Jim Oberweis, thanks for joining us on the Illinois Channel.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
You're watching the Illinois Channel, an independent nonprofit corporation formed to provide gavel-to-gavel coverage of Illinois state government and other public affairs events taking place across Illinois.